Thank you, Danny and Sarah. It's a pleasure to be here, everyone. Can people change? Can someone go from being an ideological fighter with an extremist group to someone who believes in peace, in diversity, and in coexistence? My name is Lea Baroudi, and I'm going to try to answer this question today through sharing my experience and how I inadvertently contributed to peace. I say inadvertently because I'm not your typical peace builder. I'm a Lebanese Christian, and I was born and spent my childhood during the Lebanese Civil War. Like many, I carried that war with me long after the fighting had stopped. I had my share of fleeing under the bombs from one area to another, to immigrating many times and coming back, and growing up always with this whisper, the other is out to get us. I didn't start out wanting to fix the world. I studied in top business schools, worked in the corporate world, and I thought I had my life mapped out. But I always had this deep curiosity about people. I even studied psychology as a minor. And through my daily interactions with people as a grown-up, I started to realize that this other that's out to get us feeling that I had deeply buried, unresolved, was also unresolved with many of the Lebanese people. So one day, I decided to study and train in mediation, first to try and understand myself, and then maybe, hopefully, others. And in 2014, that curiosity led me to Tripoli, in the north of Lebanon, not far from the Syrian border. Before that, I had never been to Tripoli because of all the violence, the poverty, and the stigma of extremism surrounding this city. There, two very large neighborhoods had been fighting for years their own version of the Syrian civil war. A Alawite neighborhood and a Sunni neighborhood, separated by just one street, ironically called Syria Street. Young men from these two neighborhoods were not only fighting each other in 42 rounds of deadly clashes, but when the war in Syria started, they started to cross the border as well to fight with ISIS, with al-Nusra Front, the regime, or Hezbollah, depending on which side they were on. My idea was simple back then and very small. Why don't I try to use theater to reconcile some of these fighters? When I had this idea, everyone told me I was crazy and very naive. Tripoli is very dangerous, no place for a woman, and you're a Christian, you're going to get yourself killed. Even a man could not do this. It took me 2 years to convince people to help me and to convince fighters to join. And then one day, 16 young men walked into a rehearsal hall, angry and full of hate, to act in a play inspired by their lives, 8 from each side. The beginnings were so hard. When they showed up armed. We used to search them, find razor blades under their tongues, knives in their socks, guns in their pockets. One of them came one day with a homemade bomb. They saw each other as mortal enemies, but because we told them that the play was inspired by their lives, they started to share each other's stories. And when they did, they started to realize they were not so different. They shared the same pains, the same dreams, the same losses, the same fears, and friendships started to blossom. And the play, Love and War on the Rooftop, toured with full houses and standing ovations. We called it Love and War on the Rooftop because they told us that everything in their areas used to happen on rooftops, from snipers shooting at each other to friends playing cards or secret love rendezvous, because this and prison were the only places that they could meet. And that was my first aha moment. We needed a space, a place where former enemies could meet without fear. So we opened the cafe right on the former demarcation line, on Syria Street. At first, it was just a place of gathering, dialogue, and coffee. Slowly, it became a community center, then a full-fledged reconciliation and reintegration hub, having worked so far with over 700 former fighters and women. Many of them today are the ones calming the tensions, preventing violence, and bringing peace and stability to their neighborhoods. But let me tell you why it worked. Through two people I will never forget. Samir and Omar, and I'm using fake names. Samir came into the rehearsals of the play tense, angry, always ready to fight. 2 weeks in, he tells me he's leaving for Syria to fight with Al-Nusra Front. I asked him why. He said, "You wouldn't understand, you are an infidel." I insisted, "Try me." He first told me, because we Sunnis are oppressed, our brothers are dying for the cause, for God, and also, he added, I can get married and have children. I asked him to explain, and he told me he was stateless because his father was in jail when he was born and missed the deadline to register him as per the Lebanese law. I started asking him all sorts of questions about his situation and asked him to wait a bit before going. I started speaking to lawyers, pushing for papers, and helping him in an endless legal battle. Fast forward 10 years, today, Samir is one of the main coordinators of the program, helping me in our mission. And when I asked him what changed, he said, "You didn't try to convince me with logical arguments or what's right or wrong not to go. You just listened, you didn't judge, you tried to help, and you kept your word." Today, Samir is married, and he has a daughter named Lea. Then there is Omar. Omar, who came to us years after Samir. He had spent 5 years fighting with ISIS in Syria. He came back to Lebanon, lived hidden from the authorities, sometimes with a suicide belt around his waist. He was finally later caught and imprisoned 6 years on terrorism charges. Inside prison, he saw the opening of our cafe on TV and said to himself, "Those traitors, when I get out, I'm going to bomb this place." After prison, he started circling around the cafe, angry and suspicious. The irony is that he ended up joining out of desperation because he needed support and no one would employ him, convinced by another Samir. At first, he wouldn't even look me in the eye and stormed out multiple times. One day, I noticed he was unwell. I said, "You need a doctor." He refused. I insisted. He refused again. I insisted to know why, and after hours, he finally admitted to me that he was traumatized of medical facilities because of his time in prison. I still insisted, and I shared with him how I overcame some of my traumas, among them fear of flying, and offered to go with him. And after hours of talking, he finally caved in. The next day, Omar comes into the cafe with a group of his friends, his brother in arms, and looked me in the eye and told me, "I convinced them to join the program. I told them, maybe we could trust you, that you were different." Fast forward 5 years. Omar today, who was part of ISIS and who wanted to bomb our cafe, is now in charge of its security and actively mentoring other young men not to fall in the same path that he did. When I asked him what changed, he told me, "The whole program is great. The psychological support, the classes, the vocational trainings, the dialogue, the community service, everything. But that's not what made me click." And he reminded me of that moment and said, "It was the first time in my life I felt like a human being, and the first time I saw other people as humans too." These are just 2 stories out of hundreds that touched me deeply and taught me the real secret of peace building. So to go back to the first question, can people change? For me, no, because it's not about change. It's about helping people go back to their core selves, to who they were before the traumas, the betrayals, the humiliations, the negative experiences, and the fear. Because fear makes us be the worst versions of ourselves. It activates our primitive brain, the amygdala, and pushes us to do terrible things, especially when manipulated by external factors. But when people feel safe again, that fear loses its grip. The Lebanese French writer, Amin Maalouf, said, "Our identity is made of multiple layers, but when one of them feels threatened, it can swallow all the rest." That's what radicalization does. And our job is to make people feel safe in their identities so they don't need to destroy others to protect it. And in today's world, we are making people more and more afraid. 2, conflict is emotional, not rational. Yet too often, the peace-building world tries to resolve conflict with rational tools. Data, processes, logic, activities, KPIs. Yet, yes, those things matter, but they should never be the main focus, because no matter how perfect our interventions and processes are, if we do not touch people emotionally, we will not achieve much. What matters most is not what we make people do or what we make them think. It's what we make them feel. Do they feel judged or seen? Do they feel disposable or that they matter? Do they feel belonging and hope or anger and betrayal? Lastly, when I studied mediation, they taught us the most important thing is to remain impartial. For me, that's not true. The most important thing is to build trust. It's not about us, and yet, in a way, it is very much about us. We are the bridge. If they don't trust us enough to cross it, they will never trust the other waiting on the other side. And that trust is not built by big speeches, but through acts, no matter how small they are. Because these small acts are tremendously contagious and create a ripple effect. So finally, I will leave you with this. For me, peace isn't abstract. It isn't a process. Peace is human. And if we want real change in the world, we must stop treating people like problems to fix and see them as wounds to heal and stories to hear. Thank you.